Doudou la minette, l'enfant de Jeannette. Si la minette dit doudou pas, chatte marron va sous Kael. Doudou la minette, l'enfant de Jeannette. Si la minette dit doudou pas, chatte marron va sous Kael. Doudou la minette, l'enfant de Jeannette. Si la minette dit doudou pas,
Petite fille de la
chatte
rivière.
marron va
¿Por qué les cantas esa canción?
Miemaou, 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 miem ze tout. Miaval la terre. Mais jette-moi ton cœur. Doudou. Mon jolis enfant. De l'eau la caillée. Mon casle en graines. Doudou. Volcan l'a pété. Volcan l'a pété. Volcan l'a pété. Volcan l'a pété. Couleur. Pied de bois flamboyant. Couleur. Pied de bois résilience. Tifi volcan. Tifi volcan. M'y connais où sortent la terre, toute bonne volcan. Pourquoi ou Yem raconte des histoires volcan.
Tal vez ellas sepan decirme de dónde vengo. Duerme mi pequeña, no vale la pena despertar. Duerme mi pequeña, no vale la pena despertar.
Good evening. Thank you for that warm applause. I think we're getting warmer and warmer by the minute. Welcome to the Jan van Eyck Academy. Welcome to the Intergovernmental Panel on Arts and Climate Change, Working Group 4. My name is Bruno Alves de Almeida. I work here at the Jan van Eyck as a curator and resident liaison. And the beautiful moment that you just witnessed was collaborative work from current Jan van Eyck Academy participants, Amauta Garcia and David Camargo, and Yasmine Attoumane. This performance is titled Liquid Volcanoes, and you just witnessed the first part of a dialogue between the child of a river and the daughter of a volcano. And Yasmine and Amauta will have something else to say later in the evening. I think the voices, the vibrations, the feelings, and the murmurs that Yasmine and Amauta brought to us and left us with here are the perfect way to start this very dry-sounding, bureaucratic, event titled Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change Working Group 4, which I will, from now on, just refer to IPACC, like the acronyms you see around me, just for the sake of brevity and my own breath. So, the IPACC is something that, despite the very dry-sounding name, wants to be exercise in imagination. It refers to the actual IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which many of you might know, and acknowledging that both the impacts of and the solutions to the climate crisis are deeply rooted in culture. The IPACC, the IPACC, wants to try to explore or think of what could it mean a stronger integration of arts and cultures, but also social sciences and humanities within such a well-defined scientific framework, and specifically within the interface of science and global policymaking. So this exercise of speculation started in the event last year, where we had an amazing group of speakers like the ones we have this year. And last year, we had an intergenerational conversation between the speakers. We had a group enacting a fictional present where the IPACC was actually a feasible possibility to be implemented. And we had a group in the future, 7 generations ahead, following the principles that many indigenous communities have at their core. So 140 years ahead, which gave us a retrospective evaluation on the shortcomings and the successes of the IPACC. Present and future met in the final assembly, and this year we're picking up the conversation and building upon many of the questions and issues and tensions that arose from last year, but this time under slightly different structure for conversation. So why Working Group 4? The IPCC is structured in 3 working groups that from last event to now have published their seminal reports on climate data that is fundamental for the designing of policies and climate protocols. And we want to imagine what would Working Group 4 actually mean. So after the event, scheduled later in the year and earlier 2023, the IPCC will publish the final report called the Synthesis Report, which is the concluding piece of a very ambitious 6th assessment cycle, which is hyper relevant to define the global policies and climate protocols that will have, despite seemingly very far away from us, will have very tangible effects in our daily lives. So this event sits within this sequence of wider global happenings, not only the ones related to the IPCC, but many of the events that we've been witnessing over the years are gut-wrenching and are part of this entangled crisis. And our proposal is to understand how can we multiply, densify, and add other layers to the conversation that might or might not have wider consequences in larger frameworks. And hopefully it will have reverberances and consequences in our own internal ways of thinking and sharing and processes. So, despite this dry-sounding title, I hope that this evening and the next 2 days will be inspiring, and in the end, the IPACC is just an umbrella for sharing and gathering different lines of research, different lines of thoughts, different languages, and stay tuned for the next days because, Creole and Spanish are not the only languages that we're going to involve, different voices and textures. So, because you were so good at that first round of applause, I would like to ask another one for Amauta, Yasmine, and David for all their hard work. Well, and since you're at it, please gather your hands also for our director, Hicham Khalidi, who I will pass the word now.
Welcome. Thank you. Coming all the way from Berlin. I will read it out, if I may. And could we have a little bit less light, maybe? Thank you. So, a warm welcome to you all in what is now the 3rd urgency intensive, since we started in 2019 with this program. It was last year in March, so this is almost 1.5 years ago. In that event, we looked at the concept of futuring and role-playing models and proposed the fictional Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change as what Bruno beautifully calls a boundary object, an object of thinking. And in this object, we can fictionally insert culture as a means of assessment next to the scientific assessment. It was wonderful hosting the many guests from around the world, amongst which the 2 wonderful vice chairs of the IPCC, Tamar Krug and Yuba Sokona. It's also my pleasure to announce that they will be with us this event again, next to many other scholars and artists and thinkers and activists. Hope they're looking at us in the camera. As part also of the assembly and gathering of Saturday. So Saturday is the assembly where we all gather and talk with each other, also as public. to engage with you on topics such as cultural assessment and the assessment of climate collapse. Last year, the whole event was online, so very different from now. Can we imagine the world we were in not so long ago? This is not so long ago at all. There were two specific moments for me of the past urgency intensive that had a lasting impact on me. As we were role-playing between the group that represented the past and the group that represented the future, the first moment that struck me in particular was when Prem, the leader of the group of the future, looked at us as if sensing our anxiety, like rabbits in a headlight, and said, "Do not worry, it will be all right." As in speaking to us all, humanity, we will make it. But, and I thought, it will not be without conflict or pain or suffering. It might not look nice. And when Prem spoke of the arts, he then said, and he was confirmed by the other members of the group of the future, that the arts that you know now of, that will cease to exist and will be substituted by something else, without further explanation, as if to nod us that the rest is for us to consider. At that moment, I forgot about the role-playing. The conceptual idea of the play was literally gone. I was there. It was the future speaking to me. It made me realize that representation is a double-edged sword, and that there is no way I can grasp the full implications of our imaginative capabilities. Because the second moment was when member Amy of the group of the future spoke to us and said, "You cannot use your extractive methods in talking about the very processes of extraction," pointed to me directly and emphasizing that the event as an event enhances the visibility of the academy. Furthering your stance is moving you up the hierarchy and giving you a political voice. Representation is a model for power play here. So, still here? Okay. These two moments, the possibility of a great conflict and a possible collapse, and the awareness call of the pervasive machinery of extraction within practices of representation, the machinery of making public or publicness, as others might call it, points towards cultural institutions being implicated, as in what Rolando Vasquez, one of our dear advisors, and other decolonial scholars such as Tony Fry, would call the process of defuturing. It is the loss of futures, and the loss of worlds, and the loss of life and the life of Earth. And as Rolando would say, it is our loss of innocence that we feel now. This is what's sinking in. These two moments I took with me. I internalized them. Time has passed, and deep in me I feel we are now in a much steeper upward slope towards destruction. I made the click this summer. We are in collapse. We can see it all around us. This summer was literally a hell. I was told this week that the difference in temperature this summer between Kuwait and Maastricht was 4 degrees. And Kuwait is literally the hottest place on earth, breaking consecutively 4 of the past year's world records. We are literally in hothouse earth now, to speak in Michael Mann's words. Representation is a double-edged sword. Representation is where culture separates itself from nature. But representation is also who is to be represented and by whom. Who gets to see and from which position do we look at things? Who gets to speak? As artist Jesse Darling so clearly defines, it is by saying that the act of representation is not set apart from the ethics of representation. I have 2 accounts of representation that I would like to share with you before I leave you with the keynote of the wonderful Bayo. Each of these accounts reflect on one side of the double-edged sword. The first account is about the camera obscura in prehistorical ages. In 2014, an artist, scholar, and friend of mine, Matt Catton, set out to calculate in detail the probability of the emergence of consciousness through representation in the prehistorical age. He argued that there was a possibility that people in prehistorical ages were confronted with representation through the concept of what we now know of as the camera obscura. Images projected through slits and small holes in the heights of the dwellings of these people may have confronted them with an image of the world upside down. But these upside down images of events taking place outside, and in some cases, these images might not have been upside down because of the mirror reflections in waters nearby, must have had an uncanny effect on these inhabitants of these spaces. It must have been unclear to them of whether they were looking at a spiritual world or something else. It must have been unconsciously shocking to see these projected images on the surfaces of the heights, or in other cases on the walls of the caves that they might have dwelled in. I say unconsciously because they might themselves have been in between a state of consciousness, as we know it today, and a state of total immersion with nature. This object of thinking, the camera obscura as a boundary object of consciousness, has many implications. Besides an art historical implication that cinema might have preceded painting or drawing, it forces us to back the question of what are the boundaries and entanglements between the spiritual, the ritual, imagination, representation, and consciousness. All of these aspects seem to collapse within this moment of recognition. At first spiritual and ritual, and probably slowly shifting towards an idea of an objective world outside. A world waiting to be rationalized. This is the moment where the objective detached itself from the subjective being a non-awareness of a world outside. This is the moment in which representation was born, and the separation between us and nature, the separation between culture and nature has begun. The second account is from a trip to Venice this summer. This summer I set out to visit the Venice Biennale by train. It took me longer than anticipated, but I got there. Having arrived at the Biennale, I was happy to see my fellow colleagues and friends that I have missed for so long during the corona crisis. I set out to see the exhibition and fervently did my best not to miss much. The main exhibition in the Giardini, curated by Siciliana Alemani, was my favorite. It included only female artists, amongst which the work of Dutch female scientists such as Aletta Jacobs and Sibylle Merian. An amazing feat of Alemani, considering that showing so many female artists was never done before, and it was time that the art world took account of this. To illustrate this, in the first room after the foyer, we were confronted with a huge statue of an elephant. The elephant was situated on a pedestal in the center of the space, surrounded by other works. It was unclear to me whether it was an artwork, but I was fascinated by the fact that Cecilia had literally put an elephant in the room, as if to say, here it is. I have addressed it. It's an elephant. What fascinates me in this image is that it is an image, an act underlying the ethics behind representation. It literally speaks of representation. It is where these two layers of the double-edged sword meet in an image. Needless to say that the elephant was rendered back to a figure of speech because it lacked to address the ecological consequences that a show with at least 1,000 works might bring. I am truly fascinated by this oscillation between representation as image, aesthetics, and representations as political inclusion and ethics. The elephant in the room is in fact a representation of an image of non-representation, the aesthetics of ethics. Now to conclude, and then I will introduce Bayo for this keynote lecture. The Earth Intensive came out of the need to have a moment each year when we would assemble the many stakeholders in our quest to put the question of urgency and transition in relation to art and institutional practice up front. As a residency hosting many people from around the world, we bring together our participants, our team, and the many great minds that have something to offer in this quest. Bringing them together with the public, together with others and other stakeholders. So how do we look at art practices today when we take into consideration the context of the multitude of crises that we are now facing? And the other way around, what role can art practice play in thinking about these crises? And we have to walk the talk. We can learn from each other and give rise to attempts for true changes in the world. Now I want to conclude I would like to thank everyone involved for making this event a truly successful and thrilling event. And I would like to congratulate Bruno for another sharp and exciting program. Thank you very much. Can I have an applause for Bruno, please? And again, with such great speakers and collaborators, and I'm happy we are able to work with so many of our participants every time. Thank you for that. I would like to welcome the public as well as all the other non-performing participants, alumni team and board members. And I would like to thank our sponsors and partners. I'm very excited to have the IPCC on board again and all these other scientific and creative centers that we collaborate with such as Urban Future Studio of the University of Utrecht. I would like to introduce Bayo. I took your statement just as it is because I really love it. Bayo Akomolafe, rooted with the Yoruba people in a more than human world, is the father to Aletheia and Kea. Am I pronouncing it right? The grateful life partner to Lie, son and brother. A widely celebrated international speaker, posthumanist thinker, poet, teacher, public, intellectual, essayist, and author of 2 books. Titled These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanities Search for Home, by North Atlantic Books, and we will tell our own story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Bayo is the convener of the concepts of post-activism, transraciality, and ontofugitivity. He's also the founder of the Emergence Network and the host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains. Bayo, you will speak of data and the epistemological heart of climate discourse, data as the epistemological heart of climate discourse. But I will leave it to you to say what you need to say, in what way you want to say it. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Hello, good evening. Good evening. Oh, thank you so much, my brother. And I would just like to, I wish I could dedicate my entire talk to saying thank you to this beautiful assemblage. I traveled, he said I was from Berlin. I actually came all the way from India. So I love you guys, right? Came all the way from India to make this happen. But you and Bruno and my dear sister, Margarita, and the entire assemblage have been so welcoming, so hospitable, and I can wax poetic for an hour about how welcoming you have been. To help me celebrate that, I'm a Yoruba person. We love greeting people. We love hugging. I come with the technology of hugging. It's a radical act in epidemiological times, I know, but I invite us as an act and ritual of gratitude for this assemblage, this underground spiritual government, this conspiracy that we're crafting together, because you all are criminals now being here, okay? In an act of ritualizing my gratitude, I'd like you to stand up, everyone together. Let's all stand up. It's not too hard. And I'd like you to find 2 or 3 persons and hug them so tight that your skin leaves a stain on their skin. Do it. Let's go. Only 3? Only 3. All righty then. Okay. 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 You know, I've told people to do this many times, and they took half an hour, you know, just to, it's like everyone missed hugging for so long that we are, you know. So an applause. Let's just applaud this. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me begin right away so we don't take too much time here. The topics the ideas, the concepts, the insights that I'm hoping to dance with, to waltz it with, almost like the beautiful ritual that played out in front of us today, are so dense that that we will not be able to cover them in an hour or in 3 months. But I'm hoping to give us a homeopathic dose or morsel of what this might imply, of the things that I'm talking about today. I call it, they should have sent a poet, art at the end of the world. And I'd like to begin with an experiment that I conducted. 2015 was when? How many years ago? 7 years ago. Feels like 20 years ago. Pandemic time, PT. But 2015 in Richmond, Virginia, I had an experiment with my 2-year-old, then 2-year-old daughter, Alethea. It was the first time I did that experiment and the last time that I did the experiment. And let me tell you the details of this experiment. It was basically, I woke up this morning with an idea. I woke up that morning with a bright idea. I said, this day I will say yes to anything Alethea asks me to do. So this is a fair warning to all of you listening right now. How many of you have toddlers at home? Don't do this. Don't try this at home. Well, I had this idea and I said I was going to say yes. And Alethea is this wise, I don't want to say the word that wants to come to my lips, but she's this wise, cracking toddler. You know, she's this wise child. Her age belies the wisdom and the insights that she has. And she knew what I was up to. And she was like, she started to play me with my own idea. It was like I'd objectified her and she returns the gaze of objectification. And then she started to, oh, this is what you want to do? Did you really go into this? Okay, let's see how far you go with this idea. So she said, Dada, I want to go swim. Now, I am the stereotypic embodiment of the idea that black people cannot swim, right? Black people obviously can swim, and that's a stereotype that black people cannot swim. But if there were such a stereotype, I am that stereotype. Along with fried chicken, that all black people like fried chicken. I am that person, right? I am the person that cannot swim to save his life, even if you offered me €1 million, right? But Alethea said, Dada, let's go swim. And I had committed to the process, so I said, yes, let's go swim. There was a swimming pool nearby in the real estate, in the estate. And so I felt, what's the harm that could come of it? I would just wade, there's someone nearby that could save me if I drown. And we started to go. And then along the way, just as we're about to take the right turn to the pool, Alethea said, that's not the pool, that's the pool. And she was pointing to a lake. Like, that's my daughter. She was pointing to a lake. I said, no, that's not the swimming, that's a lake. This is the swimming pool. But she said, no, Dada, this is the swimming pool. My experiment said I say yes to everything, so I decided to go along with it. So I said, okay, that's the swimming pool. And as we started to go to the lake that had metamorphosed into a swimming pool, or the swimming pool that was now the lake, she said, Dada, stop. And she said, remove your slippers and wear mine, and then I will wear yours. And it was beginning to get really awkward. And people, and American joggers that were jogging nearby were really looking at us and maybe thinking of calling the police officers to arrest me. And I was really getting very, very worried about what we were doing. And then we arrived summarily at the edge of the lake. And I'll tell you what happened afterwards. This is my daughter. This is when she was just around the age of conspiracy that I speak about. And that was Richmond, Virginia in 2015. And that experiment shook me to my core and is at the heart of most of the things I do today. And I'll tell you more about that story in time. Now, I was thinking about this thing with Alethea, this experiment, as I started to eat and feed, literally consume, the practices and the writings of someone called Fernand Deligny. Who knows that person? Deligny? Anyone here? Oh, no. Great. You don't know him. So I can pretend to be all new and brilliant. Deligny is a person I would love to introduce to you today, and his work has inspired and is continuing to inspire the work that I do. But I started to think my experiment with Alethea with some of the work that Fernand Deligny did in the 1950s, in the 1960s, and in the 1970s. I'll tell you much more about him. Let me set the scene, tell the story. To tell the story of Fernand Deligny, could you put the light off? It's more aesthetically pleasing to me. I like the dark. Let me start. The story starts in German-occupied France, right? This was in the time of Second World War. Around that time, there was an uprising of psychiatrists and patients around France because the Nazi occupation was actually killing patients in line with the Nazi policy of exterminating people who were labeled as mentally ill, right? About 45,000 people were killed. And not just because of wartime dynamics, not because of starvation or, impoverishment or something. It was because there was a policy that was actively in place to exterminate people in the hospitals. And so there was this uprising in France to defeat the fascist governments. I think I have the picture of the founder of what would soon be known during that time as institutional psychotherapy. His name is Francois Dusqueuel, and he's holding up a structure that was created by a patient. He's considered the father of anti-psychiatry. He's considered the father of a movement that was designed to topple the idea of psychiatry and the fascist government that was imposed upon France. Well, I've written it here that about 40,000 people, 45,000 people were killed. Now, in that small town, in a hospital that Francois was leading, there was this uprising, like I've said. And this uprising was, not just against fascism, but was against psychotherapy as an institutional practice. What were they against? These were the ideas. They were frustrated with biological essentialism, right? The attempts to reduce mental illness, as was probably the name given to it at the time, to neuropathology. It's a trend that is repeating itself even now. As we begin to have more insights into the brain, we're reducing everything to the brain. Oh, autistic tensions and characteristics and features are brain-based. Everything is brain-based these days. My son is on the spectrum, and I will tell you stories about that if time permits. But my wife and I refuse to see it as his disability, as something that his brain is doing. And we're learning to see it as a construct, a product, a social arrangement, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So they were frustrated with biological essentialism and neuropathologization, right? They also rejected psychoanalysis. Who knows psychoanalysis here? I'm sure you've heard of it. Freud, language, penises, all of that. It's all part of the story. Phallic extensions, camels, all of that. Dreams, couches. It's the whole psychoanalytic trend has spilled into popular culture, and every one of us knows the analyst with the mustache and the balding hair. Well, they rejected the psychoanalytic tensions and insights of those times, resisting the notion that autistic children ought to be fixed or cured, or that if they did not have language, there was something wrong with them, right? They also critiqued alienation. And I would like to repeat this. This is by Jean Horry. He wrote an essay, a beautiful essay. It's available online if you search for it, that the hospital is ill, right? Think about that. It's not the person that is locked up in the asylum. It's the very idea of the asylum that is ill, right? It is the structures of alienation that are sick. And it was all of this. This became this mushrooming movement called the institutional psychiatry or institutional psychotherapy. And Saint Alban, which is a town but also a hospital, produced many luminaries. If you've heard of Frantz Fanon, the colonial thinkers, Félix Guattari, Deleuze, these are beautiful visionaries that came out from this movement. Where is this heading? Well, this guy, Jean Henri, he was a psychiatrist. He moved out of that movement of Saint Alban and created a hospital. And I cannot pronounce this very well. I think it's Courcheverny. My French is non-existent, but it sounds like that. It will pass as French, right? He founded this hospital, Clinic of Laborde, and this became the hotbed for the movement. It became the new base for the movement. Now, it is from there that Fernand Deligny found his first work. He spent several months there. Now, Fernand Deligny, I should say, was a poet. He wasn't a therapist. He was a poet. He was a film director. He was an educator. He found himself in this circle of people fomenting revolution, who are thinking about how to upset the psychiatric order, how to release autistic children into the wilds and let them be themselves. Fernand Deligny was part of this movement, and he wanted to do something about it. So here at this hospital, he met a 15-year-old kid called Jean-Marie, who was nonverbal, who was an autistic nonverbal kid. And it was Jean-Marie that inspired everything that Fernand Deligny did later on. Inspired by Jean-Marie, Deligny left the clinic in the 1950s to conduct a series of residential projects in the wilderness. So he went to the south of France, in the unforgiving, rocky terrain of Cevennes, and created this village. Think of it as a guerrilla-style arrangement where everyone gathered and they lived with the autistic children without seeking to control them, without seeking to explain their behavior, just like some of us may want to explain what just happened here, right? And the idea is not to explain it, but for it to crack into our sensorial monoculture and for something else to spring from our psyches, right? So Deligny refused to explain the kids. He refused to rehabilitate them, right? If he didn't do this, those kids would have been institutionalized, hitting their heads on the walls, walking around in circles all the time, and then everyone will say these kids should be discarded, and the Nazi government will kill them off. He released them into the wilderness and just followed them, allowed them to do whatever they did. If you read the accounts, or if you read the accounts of what happened in the wilderness, it said that sometimes the kids would stack plates upon each other, just stack them high, just for the fun of it. And then they would crash. And then everyone would pick them up and continue like nothing happened. If a kid started to scream, rah, rah, they did nothing about it. Deligny would say, well, witness the screaming as you would witness a flower. That's it. Nothing to be cured, nothing to be explained. It was a radical attempt in radical hospitality, just like the one Bruno offered me yesterday. Deligny was a self-described primordial communist. I like that. A cartographer of wonder lines. And he rejected the asylum care of the establishment. For him, disability wasn't lack. It was the brokenness of the semiotic order, the language order, the order that insists that all of us need to be productive and useful. And that if we are not productive and if we don't have a purpose, then there's something wrong with us. Right? It was like a playful assumption of an alien world. So he refused to productivize autism. I put his picture behind there with Jean-Marie. I didn't want to represent them, right? But I wanted a way to let them spill through the background. Revolutionary pair they were. About Jean-Marie, he would write, and this is a poem by Deligny. He listens. No animal listens this way for nothing to the sound coming from the depths of water. So it's interesting that Deligny called his project tentative, or tentatives, or attempts. He didn't call them goals or objectives or imperatives. There was a sense of humility that we're trying something here. It is very likely to fail, but we will try it anyway. That's art. We're going to try to live without language. We're just going to sit with these kids as if they were elders, as if they were alien, as if they were more than human, and we're going to be with them without trying to cure them. Right? He refused to address the children in language with his collaborators, other artists who were not trained in therapy, mind you, and instead began to follow their autistic counterparts as they wandered through the rocky terrain, as they just walked up and down through the rocky terrain of Savannah in the 60s, in the 50s, just walking. And then they would follow them, and they would map what they were doing on scraps of paper, right? They did not control their movements. They did not tell them where to go. It was an act of getting lost. I'm the Yoruba person here. Is there any other Yoruba person here? Great. There's a proverb where I come from that says, in order to find your way, you must become lost. Generously lost. This was an act of becoming lost. It was losing the boundaries. There was no Siri, there was no Google Maps. It was just wandering away from the cartography of being found. Those tracings soon became, like the tracing of my sister here, lines collapsing into lines. They became the central part of that residential project as they became more and more elaborate. Now, I will show you some of those pictures right now. You've seen one of them already. The tentative produced strange art. How many of you have watched Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, the movie? Brother, you've watched it. Great. You've watched it, David. Anyone else? David, okay, you've watched it, Arrival? How many of you have read the book that it came from? You've read it. Good, you're the only one. No one else here. You won. You've won a prize, $5,000 from it's called Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. Yes. Beautiful story. Short story, but it's awesome. The tracings that the tentative produced almost look like those alien fonts, the heptapods, in that story. It was like extra-dimensional, non-linear fonts that told a different story that did not collapse to meaning. I'll show you some of it now. Look at those maps. Just how the kids were wandering through the wilderness. And they did nothing but trace them. Just tracing and creating palimpsests, haunting each other. Lines haunting lines, haunting lines, haunting lines. The density of where they walked and where they frequented, frequently visited, just seeing other lines. There are many of these. I'm actually looking for a book. It's an old book. I've been looking for it for a long time that has all of those maps produced. I haven't seen it yet, but I've been looking for it for a long time. So if you have it here, please, I'm willing to pay good, the Academy is willing to pay good money for it on my behalf. Beautiful, unwieldy. Yes, it looks like a horse. It's not intended to look like anything, but these are the wanderings. Now I'm going to say a lot more about these later on, but I just want you to let them spill into your person and let them affect you. These were not just scribbled lines. These were the wanderings of autistic children in a revolutionary project that many have not heard of that happened in the south of France in post-war era. Now, he called these tracings Linder or something like errant lines. I'm not sure I mastered the French of that yet, but he called it wandering lines, right? Lines of errancy or lines of flight. In fact, Deligny inspired Deleuze and Guattari in their formulation of lines of flight, right? If you've read any of Deleuzian scripts or writing, you would see them speak about lines of convergence. This is how the status quo reinforces itself over and over and over again. And then a line of flight, a breakthrough happens. And this breakthrough is autistic, right? So those tracings marked Deligny's conviction that disability was generative eruption. I call it generative incapacitation, right? Incapacitation. Most of these days we run for capacity building workshops, right? So we can put on our CV that I have a new skill that can meet the demands of the moment. I'm looking for incapacitation, the places where we don't know what to do next. And somehow that gives birth to an abundance that is strange, stranger than the needs of this time. Deligny noticed that disability is a crack in the imperatives of institutionalized care and capture. It is a stunning generosity of the autistic and the poverty of neurotypical subjectivity. You might say, what do we do next? What do we do next? There's something about the silence of the children that he lived with that spoke eloquently to the needs of our time, even right now. This was getting lost, a performative dishumanism, a refusal to fix, explain, or contain. So I cannot help but think about today's anxious ramblings and conversations about the weather and climate chaos as a form of institutionalization, as a way we're institutionalizing or re-institutionalizing the autistic child, where containment is data. Right? I'm saying that, in a sense, our conversations around climate collapse and climate chaos seems to repeat the very things that Deligny was trying to move away from. It's almost like the weather has gone autistic and is no longer productive in the ways that our capitalist arrangements want it to be productive. And so we're trying to contain it. We're trying to say, sit down and do your work. Be pleasant when we want you to, okay? Be nice and cloudy, and give us an update on when you're going to be unwieldy and angry and wild. But the weather is traipsing away from predictability, refusing to sit in the family way, refusing to cuddle us humans. It's gone autistic, if you will. And most of the conversations we're having today is, how do we get back to normal? How do we sustain? We hide our archetypes and our true imperatives behind nice-sounding phrases like participatory, sustainability, habitual, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot that wants to happen that is hidden by these nice-sounding phrases. Let's go ahead together. My brother has just done an awesome work and job in explaining the extremely boring IPCC report. And for those of you who need an update, I don't think anyone needs that now. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, its most recent report, the second part of that report, this has taken many years to come by, has a few things that I might want to update you on. And this was released February, I think in February 27, the latest one, the second part of Working Group 2. I've kind of summarized it. If you've read it, or if you haven't read it, it's available on the internet. It's great reading. The data strongly suggests that the world is set to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius level in 2 decades. That's one takeaway. Only drastic cuts in carbon emissions might help. Another takeaway. Humans are the main drivers. We know that. We're the villains in this story. Humans are the main drivers. Of course, that's another political statement to make. Who's human? Who's left out of being human? Because the human has always been a political category that has been denied access, denied openness to many groups of people. But that's another conversation. Maybe 2023, we can talk about that. And then we are irreparably close to irreversible tipping points. Forests are dying, ocean acidification and the rise of the ocean, sea levels. And this is saying that at some point, I hope that there are no gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen in the building. I hope that we're all in this together, in the shittiness of this, so I can say words like shit. The shit has hit the fan is the story of the IPCC. And there's no coming back from this. There's not likely to be, in this report, according to this report, salvation. No easy walking out from this. So what do? We need solutions. Some of you know some of these solutions. I'm going to go back to the slide previous so you don't get, no, that's not what I want to do. If I can get a few solutions you know already, you don't need to raise your hand, just shout it out from where you are. Solutions to climate chaos and collapse. Please, someone said something? Carbon capture. Awesome. $1,000 for him. Thank you, brother. Anyone else? Eat the rich. Yes. Yummy. Jeff Bezos, a la carte. Jeff Bezos reduced. Anyone else? Yes. Eat the rich. What else? I hope Amazon is not a sponsor of this event. Okay. Anyone else? Eat the rich. Carbon capture. Carbon neutral, say something more hyphenated. Sustainability, carbon offset. Okay, so that's a very, very popular one. Anyone else? I'll just take 2 more. Who's it? Imaginary. Say that again, sister. Imagination. Oh, imaginaries. New imaginaries. Awesome. Yes, a solution. Okay, thank you. That's far out. That's a good one. Okay, one more. Carbon tax, cap and trade. You know the deal. Okay. No one talked about electric vehicles. No one talked about turning off the lights. Turn off the lights, brother. About any of that. And brought back as new consumer products for us who are deliberately and religiously parsing our trash into painstakingly labeled trash, plastic and food, is actually not taken to that green emerald faraway land that you think it's taken to. It's taken to Nigeria. It's taken to Vietnam. It's taken to India. It's taken to the Gambia. It's dumped in Ghana, right? Only 5%. The infrastructure for this green land, Greenland is an actual space, but the infrastructure for this green economy that we imagine could replace the one that we're living in right now doesn't exist, right? So when I travel to Europe or Americas, I constantly chuckle to myself when I see people take their coffee cups and straws and put it in the trash. And I say, I understand. I understand where you're coming from. But this is going to become part of my playground. I grew up knowing what the recycle symbol meant before I knew what it meant, right? I grew up seeing it everywhere around me, dumped around me in playgrounds in the global south before I knew what it was implying, right? So I'm trying to say here that some of the things we call solutions are actually reinforcements of the paradigm we're trying to escape. What if the way we report and understand and examine and engage and encounter the crisis is the crisis? That's the question. Back to the plot. We need solutions. That's what everyone's saying. We need solutions. Now, it would seem that from the report that these practical solutions are the best chances we have at saving ourselves and saving the planet, right? Some of what you've mentioned, thank you, and some of what you've not mentioned as well, like eating the rich. That one isn't part of the IPCC report, but we understand what you mean, brother. I already know your politics by saying eat the rich, right? Now, the problem of these, and I want to read this out, the problem with these resolutions is that their frames of reference are reinforcements of the onto-epistemological conditions that gave birth to the crisis in the first place, and are so excruciatingly narrow, lacking the kind of robustness an end-of-world scenario invites. I'm just going to pause there and take you through what I mean by that. November 2021, a municipality in Denmark became the laughingstock of headlines around the world because, and I'll tell you this story, Denmark is very serious about its climate policy. Right? That municipality has tractors that go along a beach and clean that beach shore of its seaweed and plastic and debris, right? It cleans it up, right? $150,000 a year cleaning the beach because they're serious about solutions. The thing is, that same tractor dumps the trash back into the water, right? Every year, cleans it up religiously and dumps it back into the water. Everyone heard about this, and it became a huge deal in 2021. And it's still reverberating, I think, even to this day. Experts around the world called it stupid. Just single epithet. Just, this is stupid. This is completely idiotic. Right? And I started to think about that. In what other ways are we stupid? Where stupidity is imperviousness to what the world is doing, and inability to listen to how the world is straying and moving and dancing, and incapacity to follow the autistic into the wilderness. In what ways is stupidity the paradigm of our times instead of just a news item? Right? Now, here's where, this is the heart of my talk. Data. I want to suggest that data is stupidity of our times. He said it. You shouldn't say that, Bayo. These are all conscientious folks here. You shouldn't speak about data in such a terrible way. I will explain myself. And hopefully, I won't be canceled before I get out of the door. Okay? Data as stupidity. At first glance, data seems like something neutral. When we think about data, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? I'll ask you. You don't need to look at the slides. Don't cheat. Statistics, what else? The cloud. Brother, you're intent on winning that money for tonight, right? You said it. I'm so sorry. So you're competing with my brother here. Did you say the cloud? The cloud, like Google Cloud and stuff like that. Okay. What else? You say numbers. Someone said crap. Oh, Oh, I thought you said just if you said crap, it would have been great. Like crap. Data is crap. Graphs, yes. I hear you. Math, figures, numbers, the nitty-gritty of a pre-given reality, right? Bytes and pieces and morsels and glimpses of a world that is still data, right? Is an aspect, immovable, epistemologically sound, ontologically stable. Data, an image of a world that is real, incontrovertible, irrefutable, stable, like a neurotypical child. So it seems apolitical, value-free, right? Has no, how we speak about data today? The data says so, right? It cuts through all the politics. If we can only arrive at data, data says so. It is sacred. It is there. There's nothing you can say about it any longer. What's that American phrase? Just the facts, ma'am. It's there. It's factual. It's the end result of scientific inquiry, the ennobled scientific method. It is a potentially pure account of a pre-given reality. However, at the heart of data is an ideology, and this is where it gets scandalous. It's an ideology that presupposes a divide. You're just saying, that's why I was chuckling when you were saying that. It presupposes a divide between subject, us, and object, the world, right? It's a divide between the epistemological question of how we know and the ontology of what we know, right? Let me explain that a little bit. Like, there is an assumption that the world is there for the keeping. It's there to be known and named and understood. It is always accessible, right? We describe it like the story in the book of Genesis of Adam coming into creation and naming all the animals. The world is just there to be named. It's a phallic recipient of our agency, right? It's just there to be interpreted and named and organized by us, right? So we kind of stabilize, and this is at the very heart of every colonial enterprise. It names and stabilizes an objective world, but it allows the subject to vary. So however way I come to the object, I want the object to be there. How many of you watch Toy Story? How many of you have watched Toy Story, right? Now, beyond watching Toy Story, how many of you would like to come to your toys, if you still have toys here at your age? I want to have a conversation with you. But how many of you would come back to your toys, whatever your toys are, and would be shocked to find your toys have a life of their own? Like they're having lists, they have Tinder, they tweet, they have Facebook, they're talking to each other, they have a life of their own. It would be shocking to know that the world is doing things that isn't being done by us. Sometimes when we use language like the computer refused to start, we're corrected because we say, well, computers cannot refuse to start, right? They have no such agency. They just didn't start because you've lost the plot somewhere. Hit the computer a couple of times and it should start. But computers don't refuse to start. But what if there's a sense in which the world is agentially vibrant and alive and does things, right? Even without our own control, right? What if your toys do things at night? I'll just drop this for good measure in our consideration, that there was a piece by a journalist in The Economist about certain artifacts that were stolen from Nigeria by a British expeditionary force in 1897 that is called the Benin Bronzes. Has anyone heard of the Benin Bronzes before? Huge collection of beautiful artifacts strewn over Europe, right? Especially densely populated in London, right? Now, some of the guards in those museums in London reported that those artifacts were doing things at night. This is not a woo. This this journal piece, this article did not appear in New Age Today. It appeared in The Economist. Okay? In The Economist, it was called, I think, something like Restless Objects. I cannot remember, or maybe that was the name I gave to it in my essay that I haven't still finished writing. But it was the account of guards being haunted by the objects that are supposedly objectified and are supposed to be still, just waiting to be viewed by the public, right? Like lights going off, or like the guards shutting the doors and chaining them and then walking around the corner and coming back and the doors are wide open, right? This was in The Economist. I don't know if you believe in ghosts, but that's not my point. My point is that the world is shockingly alive in more ways than our human subjectivity can notice or can give it credit for. So, when the world moves scandalously away from its predetermined categories of thought and containers, something happens. And data seems to be the anthropocentric posture that arranges us in linear encounter with a world that we presume is just there, waiting to be named and described, right? It seems to be not just, this is what you were speaking about, representationalism, right? We're trying to represent a world through the images of our mind, but we do not give account for how those images come to be, how they're co-produced by the world around us and by the position we occupy. This is colonialism, right? Colonialism is that wherever I stand is the truth, and whatever comes to my mind is a representation of a world that is pre-given. That is colonization. Colonization that says, oh, you're black, you're an animal. And because you're an animal, I shall put you at the bottom of a slave ship and carry you to worlds beyond your home. Right? It is the image, the stabilization of the image. But you know what exceeds the image? The caricature. And the caricature is constantly unwielding and unfurling around the image. So data wants to stabilize the world into bits and pieces, but the world does not want to sit still. The latter, I write, is always stabilized. It's always denied historicity. I think it was Bruno Latour that said in his book, We've Never Been Modern, that speaks about how data wants to stabilize the world, right, as a property, something that can be owned and kept and archived. The history of Euro-American coloniality and thought is the history of data, which is a tiny aspect of a vast sprawl of ideological commitments to human centrality, to human exclusivity, to the idea of human uniqueness, right? And the avatar of this superiority has always been the white male, right? Fully human. Of course, if you know the historicity of that, it's a ranking as a hegemonic device, right? The white male, and then the Indian, and then the black man, and then the black woman, and then natural resources. And this is the legacy of data, right? It's not data itself, it's the conditions that make data possible, right? Now, this way of thinking about the world is conceptualized as representationalism and intentionality, right? It proceeds by seeking to come to an objective account of the world, coming to images of the world as totalizing representations of a fixed reality, without accounting for the politics and positions and maneuverability of the viewer in the co-production of such images. Summarizing here, in a sense, data is the edifice of colonial capture. Oh, by the way, when I say whiteness, when I speak about whiteness, I'm not speaking about white identity, because I'm from Nigeria. It's the blackest nation on earth. It has more black people than Wakanda has black people. Oh, that was a joke for nerds among you. So there are no nerds among you then. Wakanda is the fictional city of Marvel. Shall I explain it? By whiteness, I mean a planet-forming, terraforming apparatus that enlists bodies in how it comes to matter, right? It enlists white bodies and black bodies and non-human bodies in its arrangement. Whiteness is not white people. Whiteness is not an identity. Whiteness is a colonial edifice. Okay? So I don't see the world in terms of identity. I see the world in terms of immanent differences. I'm a delusion in that sense. What can I tell you? But that's another conversation. So data is an edifice of colonial capture. By thinking of the world as representations of a central, stable viewer, readily accessible and intelligible, data becomes an anthropocentric stance. It's the rectilinearity of the viewer, of the researcher. It's me and my pronouncements about the world. That's why I like India, where I live, right? My wife is India. India, they say something. They say, name the color, blinds the eye. Name the color, blinds the eye. And that saying always proceeds or follows after a head wobble. To get the point across. That you cannot name the world in any final way. The attempt to do it is already an act in stupidity, where stupidity, like I said earlier, is imperviousness to what the world is doing. Data is a feature of the clearing. I'm using the phrase of my sister, Professor Erin Manning, who has a beautiful book that is coming out very shortly, Out of the Clear, Decolonial Politics. Is a feature of the clearing, a logistic of management, a cutting through the world to create settlement. Data is the slave ship, the Middle Passage, the plantation of the antebellum South, the imperial might of the colonial. Data summarily puts us out of touch with a world that kicks back, a world that wanders away, right? Data is our being out of touch. Data is our paradigmatic stupidity because we don't know what to do with a world that is dancing, a world that is more than, think about the pandemic, folks. Think about all our political attempts to nail this virus, right? To kill this thing, to put out the sign and say we're going back to normal. And this virus refused, I think the virus is autistic, refused to bend into the family way, refused to be cured. Every time we think we've nailed it, it dances to the side and it mutates into something different. It's as if it doesn't want to die. It has a life of its own. Definitely the virus is agential. I actually wrote an essay about it. Well, it's kind of a small book. It was about 60,000 words, but I started out wanting to write a 1,000-word essay about the virus. And the idea is, which political leader, think about this, a thought experiment for a break, which political leader could have made a pronouncement to everyone to go to their homes for 1 year? And then we all did it. Think about that. Could it be Obama? Obama? The Pope? Who? Putin? My brother Hicham? No one could have done what the virus did. The infinitesimally small body of the virus stole into the economy and upset the established order. And what activists had been trying to do for years, it did in 1 year. Think about that. Just bring down the levels just a little bit. We weren't able to do it with all our intelligence, with all our language, with all our policies, with COP26 and COP27 and plate number 8 and everything. We couldn't get it done. But the virus came in and all planes shut down and animals were wandering on the streets. Everything changed just by this agential eruption of this more than human entity. Am I glorifying the virus? No. I'm trying to say that there's something else at work that is more than human, right? So I'm ending the spiel about data by saying that data puts us out of touch with a world that kicks back. I love that phrase. It's by my dear sister and a mentor and a professor, Karen Barad, a world that kicks back, a world that kicks back, a world that wanders away. So you might be asking right now, and I'm sure many of you are asking that, wait, Bayo, are you trying to say that the data is not true? You were asking that, right? You were, who was asking that? No? Okay, that means you're really following then. Maybe someone, okay, yeah. Y'all online are probably asking. So are you trying to say that the data isn't true? The images and figures and stuff that we're producing, are you saying they're lies? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, you know, the question of truth is very complicated and very difficult to unfurl. But let me say this, and I'm going to put it in the cadence and the phrasing of another sister of mine, Professor Frederica Apfel-Marglin, who says, climate is echo-metaphysically resonant. It is resonant within the constraints and conditions that make it true. And those conditions are simultaneously colonial, right? The data that's coming out by the IPCC, by scientists, by hardworking people around the world, it is resonant because we're in the field where its resonance can be felt by our bodies, right? But it is not everything. The conditions that make it true are also the conditions that are putting us out of touch with a world that is inviting us to shape-shift. A world that is inviting us to become something else. Is it my time? Is that a way to say? Okay. The light was just like, guy, you need to shut up. So let me end this way. I think we're at an end of the world scenario. Not end of the world 2012, the movie. I'm throwing many nuggets, many movies, and I'm hoping to get a yeah, you know, but I'm just like, I'm a movie guy. I love movies. Movies, the dramaturgical, plays, everything, you know. So not that kind of end of world, Hollywoodized version of an end of world scenario. An end of world happens every time there's a crack in the apparatus of our sense-making rituals. That is, the way we make sense of things no longer appears to be productive. Our rituals fall asunder and something shifts. The pillars of our reality-making machines are broken or are beginning to hollow out. That's an end of the world scenario. I think of an end of the world scenario as when the world, at the end of the telescope of data, when the world dances away from being glimpsed. It's Galileo saying, "Eppure si muove." Did I pronounce that right for Italians here? No Italians here. So I pronounced it right then. Eppure si muove. And yet it moves. Did I do it right? Just 50%. 50%. And yet it moves, right? This is Galileo looking and noticing, you know, that the Copernican model was right. Like, you know, it was a heliocentric universe instead of a geocentric Catholic Church-sponsored universe. And he says, the Earth, it moves, right? And he said this, of course, they didn't agree and they forced him to recant, but that's another story. End of worlds are when new worlds dance into view and the world shifts away from being reproduced or named in a final way. An end of world is when black bodies refuse to offer their labor to the plantation. The end of world is always the refusal of the objectified to be objectified, right? And this disrupts the very tenuous and fragile arrangement between subject and object, which is how colonial arrangements are stabilized, right? It is a story of the 76 or 78 Igbo men, women, and children that were stolen in 1807 and were taken across the Atlantic and were dumped at Georgia, the state of Georgia, and somehow chased away their captors, right? This is called the Igbo landing, chased away their captors and the captors went and got reinforcements and decided to take the slaves on board. And instead of submitting their lives to the plantation, they decided to line up and march straight into the water, singing their ancestral song that the gods who brought us here would take us back home to Africa. One story about that event was that they transformed into birds and they flew back home. Of course, the colonial statement about that was they died. Someone wrote in his journal, they died. What a waste of resources. But I like the account, the speculative, artistic account that they transformed into birds and they flew back home. That act of refusal, when an object, when a toy story, when the things that we create as tools around us also influence us, marks the site of an end of world scenario. And I think we're there today. Data is undone because data will not give us the paradigmatic shift we need going forward. Data is a form of institutionalizing the autistic, right? And in doing so, we're repeating the same problems that gave birth to the naming of that situation. Now we need a form of coddy-wampling, playful ethnography that follows the child, the world, in its dance, in its artistic, waltzing agency through the rocky terrain of the next. I think we need more than solution today. I think we need more than just green gas. Did I say green gas? Green cars, green gas. Crap. That is the highlight of this talk. Just crap, just crap. The green, okay. Oh, okay. I thought, no, there was something more perverse in my mind when I thought green gas, But I'm not going to say it. We're on the internet. We have to be courteous and polite. So, end of world desires more than a solution. And it desires more than... This is a time for touch. To come in touch. Data is a coming out of touch. It's a colonial gaze. It's an objectification. It's a representationalist or representationalist stance. And now we're being invited to come into touch. I put it this way somewhere else, that data is the art of declining the offer of the world to dance with it. And now we need forms of... I'm trying to collapse the distance between science and art, right? To think, oh, science is this and art is something. No, science is a form of art. Science is the art of not paying attention, right? Art is the invitation, or a different art might be an invitation to pay attention, to co-produce with the world at large. This is not a dismissal or pathologization of science, so-called. It is an invitation to notice that its politics is steeped in colonial capture, in institutionalization, the very kind that was part of the fascist arrangements that tried to nail people and kill precious people in France, and is still at work today, right? So what we need, and this is my final slide, I believe, is some kind of ontological apostasy, an eruption, a break. And we need to cultivate new capacities of being in relationship, in touch. This is art. This is a project of art. I don't know how this art or what this art looks like. I'm definitely not prescribing, right, what this art might look like. But it's definitely an invitation for us to notice that it should be called IPACC. It really should be called the IPACC. This is not a joke. This is really an invitation for, and this is not even about saying, let's scientists speak to artists, and let's see how we can integrate art into, science work. This is not about that. This is really about noticing that we are at the end of our rope, and everything we're throwing at this monstrous being, this chimera, is coming back to us and haunting us. So solutions will not make the cut. We need a shape shift. We really do need a shape shift. I will have another time, maybe 10 years in the future, to speak about the Afro scene, what I call the Afro scene, which is a denser or thicker, playful cartography that mimics the Anthropocene, but is not reducible to the Anthropocene. But it's the aesthetic that I'm inviting us to consider, that this is a time for play. This is a time to get lost. And the Afrocene is this site for coming in touch with, an invitation to get lost. What might getting lost look like? What art dwells in tracing cartographies of failure? What neo-tentatives and matters can we co-create in response? That's the question I want to leave you with. And I'll end with a story of what happened in that moment with Alethea in Richmond, Virginia in 2015. We got to the lake and we just stood there. Those joggers were still jogging their jogging stuff behind us. And we're just standing there. And I remember feeling really awkward, and I wanted to, when you're with someone, even though that someone is a close other, but it really gets silent and you want to fill the silence with words, you want to just populate it with words so the awkwardness comes down. I tried to do that with my 2-year-old daughter. I wanted to tell her a story of the Yoruba people. Now, she's multiracial. My wife is Indian, so I wanted to say stuff about Indians and Yoruba people and blah, blah, blah. And she said, shh. She just said, shh. Dada, listen. Listen to what? So we just stood there by the lake, 2 figures uncompromising in our decision to listen to what could not be listened to. Like Delini's poem, he listens, not like an animal, to the sound of waters. And I swear to you, I don't know how to describe it other than to say that I had a feeling of rapture in that moment. Like everything burst into color. I struggled to use language to describe the moment of realization that I was entangled with everything. It's like the quacking of the ducks had urgency, and the trees and the ants around me were going to the market. It was like suddenly things were dead and they came to life. And of course, my daughter, not realizing that we had a good moment then, interrupted and said, Dada, take the mud in your hands and eat it. And I said, it's done. So that's where I terminated the experiment. And I've never done it ever since. Delini also had a similar experience. The tracing was not meant to be productive. The new doesn't have to be productive to old subjectivities. That's why it's strange. The new is new. The new is new because it's strange to us. But he continued tracing and tracing. And he discovered that there was some correspondence between the map they were making and underground currents of water. Think about that. Those autistic children were walking and they were following the tracings and the movements of underground currents of water that they could listen to, but that we had no sense of because we're so swamped and coddled by language and intelligence and data. They were attuned to something deep and earthy and possibly even therapeutic. The title of this talk was They Should Have Sent the Poet. Delini was a poet. I consider myself a poet. But if you've watched the movie Contact, have you watched the movie Contact? You've watched the movie Contact? You've watched the movie Contact? The final moment when they've built this spaceship. I'm spoiling it. I'm definitely spoiling it. They've built this spaceship. They've gone into space. They followed the instruction of this alien civilization. Jodie Foster's character is the protagonist, and she sees something at the end. The scene, it brings tears to my eyes every time I watch that scene. She leans outside of the window, she's looking through the window, and she sees something. And I love that the director of the movie does not allow us to see what she's seeing. Only through her eyes are we able to glimpse what she's seeing. And she's screaming and crying, right? She's a scientist, and she's come to the end of data. And she says they should have sent a poet. They should have sent a poet. Yeah, that's how I'll end this. Notice I wrote fin. I wrote the end in French. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Bayo. Thank you. Can we do questions, you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that okay for you?
Yeah, we can do
You
that.
sure? Should we do questions? I mean, we can also just...
If I respond to your question, ice cream. I
Okay,
would like
good.
ice cream.
You would like ice cream?
Yes.
Well, we have an ice cream specialist here.
And someone said
There he is.
Maastricht is famous for, what's it called again? Strudel?
Oh, no.
What?
Strudel.
Streisel? No, it's just, I'll get it.
Stroopwafel.
Yes.
Stroopwafel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want some.
You haven't made stroopwafel ice cream yet, but he's very elaborate in this.
Okay.
Super good.
Brother, it's
Yeah.
you and me tonight.
Good. I have two questions for you, and then I'm going to give it to the crowd. So the first of one is the connection that might have happened between what I've said and what you've said, which was nicely sort of, there was a link there. Yeah. And the thing that I've struggled with for a long time is this concept of the image as a thing that separated us from nature. Yeah. How do you feel about that? Because it's sort of this moment of not being aware, being in nature itself, that moment was sort of where we were supposed to be, and we were detached from it.
Let me explain the image in this way. If you've heard of the story of Norse mythology, Frigga, Odin, Baldur. Baldur is the son of Odin and Frigga, and a prophecy comes that basically says Baldur will die. How many of you have heard this story? It's a beautiful story. Baldur will die. Baldur is the fairest of all gods, is the handsomest of all of them. And when the story comes that he will die and go to hell, the Norse equivalent of hell, everyone is in tears. So Frigga, his mother, does exactly what you would do if you're his mom. Well, not exactly, because you're not a god. But she's a god, and she travels the universe and extract from everything a promise that they would not harm her son, basically. So she goes to Hicham, it goes to the sand, to the TV screen, to the sun, to fire, to river, to everything, and basically says, promise me that you will not harm Baldur. She extracts this thing from everyone, and everything says yes. Human, non-human, more than human, animal, principality, archetype, everything says yes. But she misses a spot, and that spot is the mistletoe. Loki gets wind that she's missed the spot, and Loki, being Loki, takes the mistletoe and fashions a weapon out of the mistletoe and hands it to a god who is playing catch with Baldur. And this god throws the weapon and Baldur dies. That's the story. But the point of the story is this, that there's something about immuring and quarantining and saving ourselves and removing ourselves from pain. That also means we remove ourselves from pleasure, right? Modernity or modern civilization is the attempt to stabilize the world outside of us. That's the image, right? It's not so much that we're separate from nature as modern civilization. Modernity is also an aspect of nature, right? So it's not that we're removed from nature. It's an attempt to make the world still, like Frigga tried to do. Like, everyone keep quiet. Don't harm my son. It's quarantine. So we go indoors, nothing. All our built environments reflect this Norse mythology, right? An attempt to stabilize everything. So that's the image. But the story is that the trickster always finds a way in. Trickster always interrupts, and it might come with pain, but that pain is salvific and emancipatory.
Thank you. Yes. The second question deals with the concept of whiteness. And even when also being invested in a lot of decolonial scholarship and thinking, whenever the question of white comes along, and here with my colleagues in Maastricht, the white community, it also feels awkward to me. In fact, I feel the shiver. You do? I do. I'm still the Dutch Moroccan. But this concept has nothing to do with white being a white person in that sense. It has to do with the system, right? Can you elaborate more about that? Because I find it really important, because much of the clash that we are seeing happening right now in the world, much of it also in the Netherlands, is really because of this misunderstanding and feeling that people might have, feeling attacked or in that sense. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool.
How many of you have heard the story of Theseus?
Another story.
Sorry, lots of stories. Theseus. You know the story of Theseus? The ship of Theseus?
No, I don't know that.
Greek mythology. Theseus is the father of the centaur, I think. Well, that's beside the point.
The centaur is the horse.
No, I was going to say the what's his name again?
The Cyclops. The Cyclops.
I think he defeats the Cyclops and wins Athens. He becomes a celebrated king of Athens. But beside the point, there was a thought experiment built around Theseus, because he would sail the 7 seas and travel, and he would come back with his ship broken. And they would replace each part, right? Maybe the stern or something would be replaced, and then he would go out again. Now, there was this thought experiment that came out in the Middle Ages that, what if Theseus came back so many times and replaced every part of the ship, and then someone took all those replacements and made another ship from you know what I'm talking about? Made another ship from the replacement parts, or the replaced parts. Which is the ship of Theseus? The one at sea, or the one that has just been constructed from replacement parts? So I pose it to you. What's the answer? Bruno is like, what's the answer?
He said both.
Both. Oh, so they've become, both are the ship. Now, imagine we just kept on replacing on and on and on and on and kept on replacing parts, and now we have 10 ships. Which is the ship of Theseus? All of them. Beautiful answer. Any other response? Any other response? Anyone? What, say that. Whichever one Theseus is on is the ship. Right, so what if Theseus dies? There's no Theseus anymore. Can we still speak about the ship of Theseus even though he's not there? He's got nothing to say.
He needs a mic.
Well, it's a fascinating thought experiment in how the self is not still, right? Like, our bodies are losing millions of cells every day. Now, imagine Bruno, all the cells he's lost today, about 30 million hair cells, nail cells, skin cells, have been falling off Bruno. Now imagine I could coagulate and congregate those cells and create a Bruno from that. The question is, which is the real Bruno? Where is Bruno? We don't talk about Bruno, no. Oh, you guys don't know that too. You know that one? You guys, what? You haven't watched it. I've forgotten the name of the cartoon, but my daughter likes it. So the question is, which is the real Bruno? Where is Bruno? If Bruno is suddenly in multiple locations, if Bruno is spatially spread out.
It's superposition.
Superposition, wave functions, quantum physics. But the idea is this, that we are not as located or locatable as we think we are. Modern civilization is the attempt to locate you in one space and in one time, right? It wants to nail you down. It wants to nail your identity down, right? And whiteness, which is the operation system of modernity, sees identity in that way. Why is it called whiteness? Because it is caught up in and entangled with the practices and the historicity of Euro-American civilization and its attempt to use other bodies to prop up its civilizational efforts, right? So it is named according to whiteness. But the point here is to notice that whiteness, again, like I said, whiteness is not white bodies, because white identified bodies were also captured, right?
Yeah.
They're also taken by a capitalist structure and told the story that once you rise above this pyramid, you're fine. You know, just come into a state of mastery above lands and ecologies and you're fine. Moved westward, there's gold there, right? That's the myth of whiteness. But it fails to take into account that our bodies are not still, that identity is constantly diasporic, constantly migrating, right? So that's the invitation of what I would think of as Black studies. Black studies is not the study of Black people. Black studies is an attempt to compost the man, the anthropos, the figure, the human that presumes itself lord over the realm, right? In Nigeria, we are very white. Do you know what that means? It means we're caught up in the project of whiteness. We want to look like London. We want to look like New York. We think in terms of development, you know. The nation-state order is just as white as one could imagine it to be. So it's not a question of particular identities or bodies within the apparatus. It's about what the assemblage, what the machine is doing, right? So what decoloniality is the refusal for anybody to be fully itself. Decoloniality is the refusal for any identity to be fully itself and only itself. It means Bruno is not just Bruno. Bruno is all of us. Bruno is the chair he's sitting in right now. Bruno is the breakfast that he had this morning. Strudel something. Bruno is microbial activism. Bruno is the guttural bacteria. Bruno is the weather. Bruno is many of these things and more. This is what is scandalizing to the modern gaze, right? So I never speak of whiteness in the way that is like, white people, you know, that is already a form of whiteness in itself, right? That's already whiteness repeating itself. I speak about whiteness as more than human, as this ecological principle that wants to shut down everything like Frege wanted to do so that the world can be free and safe for what? The self, the individual, the fetish of the self. That is modernity's greatest treasure, the self, right? And if we're to do any decolonial politics, it must attempt to tell a different story about how our bodies are more than what they are.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Yes, Anis. Wait some minutes. You want to do it? I can do it. It's fine. Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, really. I guess you're talking about intuitions that many of us have, but really thank you for articulating them so beautifully and with so much poetry and intelligence. Personally, I think it was very interesting on a intellectual level, but also deeply moving. So that's a sincere big thank you. And I don't really have a question. I have a little just a little footnote for you, that clay is actually very good for your body on many occasions. And I think your daughter actually had a very good point. She was she was probably actually also maybe invited
to eat it.
Yeah, you can eat it on not everywhere, but yeah, and you're also soil, and soil is fertility and it's life.
Want strudel or whatever it's called. I don't want clay.
Came from the soil. No, but seriously, I think maybe she was actually in tune with you at that moment, and that's maybe why she suggested
Thank you.
that.
I'll let her know. No, I wouldn't. I'm not going to let her know. But thank you so much.
It's a lot to digest, Bayo. I think people are still processing.
There's one hand.
Ah.
There. Cloud. No, not the cloud. Oh, okay. Not cloud. The not cloud.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hey, brother.
I really enjoyed especially the discussion of autism and listening to it. And so I was quite surprised to hear you refer to data as stupid. I found a bit of a difficulty with that word as a kind of structure that puts intelligence kind of as a normative aside. Do you see what I mean? And it just kind of took me by surprise, especially considering the discussion of autism, right? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I define stupidity as imperviousness, right? So without reducing that to... I gave a keynote recently at the new school in New York, and I called it the gift of stupidity, which was echoing another essay that I'd written as a letter to Donald Trump when he called Nigerians or the Nigerian country a shithole country. I don't know if you heard about that, but I wrote about the surprising nobility of shit. And I wanted to turn upside down the idea that shit is a distasteful thing. It's what our bodies produce, right? So we shouldn't distance it from ourselves. So my point here is that the stupid is not pathology here. I'm not naming it in a hierarchy of intelligence, like it's the lowest form of intelligence. I'm naming it as a form of intelligence that refuses to pay attention, right? Let me see my brother. A form of intelligence that refuses to pay attention to this time. So it's not a lack thereof, it's a turning away. And that's why I took pains to call it an imperviousness to what the world is doing. Whereas the autistic is a dancing with the animacy of the world, right? So I would, it's not pathology here that's been named, is invitational. It's more a marking of the site of where our pain is and where we can pay attention to. Not a cure, but I didn't really go into stories about my relationship with my son. I wish I did. I wish I did more about that. But maybe this might be something that is not flattering to my image, but I struggled with his condition. I still do. At many points in time, I wanted to cure him. Of course, there's no known scientific cure for autism, right? There are many conversations right there around about the condition and what it means and what it's doing. But there was something about it that was guttural, like a guttural punch to my expectations, to my desires, especially when he still was nonverbal. He's verbal right now. He speaks, maybe even too much, but but there was something about it that was really hard for me. I remember one day in the shopping mall, we were walking and he started to flail his arms and scream. And I'm a psychologist. And my psychology came out. And I wanted to control him. And I wanted to tame him, right? I remember holding him and saying something that amounted to, get yourself together, man, right? Like, because I didn't want to be embarrassed. I couldn't handle that situation. And I remember my wife came up to us. She walked back to us. My wife is the person you should have invited, by the way. She walked back to us and said, walk away. That's to me, dead-eyed. She just looked at me and said, walk away. She knew I needed mothering, fathering in that moment, and she just asked me to be away. And I followed my instructions, and I walked away. And she did what Delini probably would have done. She did not tell him, get yourself together. She didn't try to speak. In fact, she did not say a word to him. He was on the floor in front of everyone in public. And she got down on the floor and she laid herself side by side next to him. And that was it. Just next to him. And he just knew she was there. And he knew she was there and she knew he was there. And together they made a scene in Chennai, right? Just laying next to each other, saying nothing, right? And that taught me, I don't know, it taught me too much. It invited me to consider my theory, to consider what I needed in the moment, and to consider the gift of that moment. And I speak about that moment again and again, that what we need to do now is get down on all fours. It may look stupid, but there's the wisdom there, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. I don't know how to put this question. I've been thinking about it a long. I took your course last year, but we were
did?
like, yeah.
Quick. Oh.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I was one of the 500 people in Zoom, so I couldn't get the moment of. But I've been struggling a lot and about how to decolonize ourselves and find ways to destabilize everything that stabilizes us in this way, in this modern society. Because I mean, I grew up in Lima, which is not formally not Western, but we lived in a very white and Western way. So we've been swimming and breathing the whiteness and coloniality. I mean, generations before, not only my lifetime. So I'm so embedded in this system that it feels like everything that we do, it will repeat the same mechanisms that we do. And in my activism, my struggle, like how to decolonize it, destabilize it, and at the same time, there's something very real going on. I mean, data, I agree, but at the same time, things are gonna get worse and worse and worse. And there's something we can do about it to reduce suffering, what the character of your story, that I'm bad with names, she was doing, reducing the possibilities for her son to die of freedom. And I think there's also something valuable in doing that at this moment. But I just wanted to share my struggle and wanted to know how you see this. It seems also like a contradiction sometimes, being a fugitive, but at the same time feeling the urgency, we have to do something now very concrete. Yeah, how do you deal with it?
You know, even fugitives took things from the plantation, right? There's no such thing as pure fugitivity. In fact, the fugitive is an extension of the plantation, right? If you think of the world in terms of rhizomes and roots extending themselves, then the fugitive is not a break away from the plantation. The fugitive is the subaltern aspect of the plantation, the refusal of the plantation to be fully itself, right? So this is where decoloniality is. I don't think we can decolonize ourselves. So I know lots of people are promising decolonization now, right? Like here's a course. At the end of it, you will be properly decolonized. You know, but I like that phrase, that saying that says, you know, after enlightenment, the dishes, right? That, oh, you've attained enlightenment, yay, do the dishes. And literally, that's my wife. Like sometimes when I travel and I come back and I'm telling her like, it was so great and wonderful and blah, blah, blah. She said, yeah, the dishes. You know, it's like after all of that, this is, go do the dishes. I don't think we can decolonize ourselves. There's something so final about it. Like the way people speak about it, like let's decolonize ourselves. Then what? What happens then? You know, what do we do after we're finally decolonized? I think decoloniality is a speculative way of speaking about how the world is not still and how even colonial structures, oppressive systems of power, are not as stable as we think of them. And so it's an invitation more than a statement of finality, an invitation to occupy places, which I call the cracks. You might know of that already, the cracks within the system. Right? This is reminiscent of what slaves did in the so-called New World, right? They were taken away from home, taken away from family, from community, from ritual. And then in the New World, they were denied their names, their language, you know, their forms of worship. So what did they do? They found ways to put in their own forms of, especially in Brazil, you know, they found ways to put in the names of their ancestors, the names of their gods, and some process of subterfuge, you know, to camouflage their gods in the name of the gods of their masters. This is how Santeria and Candomblé and all these beautiful earth religions sprouted, right? They found the cracks and they built worlds out of that cracks. This is how samba, the beautiful beat of Brazil, came to be. So I don't think the work is to come to a space of finality and to be finally woke, or to say, I get it. You know, none of us get it. It's more like an invitation to a journey. And it is not yours alone to hold. It is not ours alone. In fact, this is not a human thing to decolonize oneself. It is an entanglement between more than human entities, between gods and archetypes and spirits and ancestors and lands and microbes. It is all of us together that create new moments, right? So you said something, there's something I wanted to respond to that I may have missed, maybe about whiteness or something, I'm not sure.
No, it seems that everything that we do in this, like swimming pool or lake of whiteness, it's repeated.
Nice metaphor there. But yes, I think what I really wanted to respond to was what you said about, okay, but we still have to pay the bills. We still have to live here, right? We still have to do stuff here. Like, can we just dismiss?
But something specific. Do we have to do something to reduce the
climate change?
Carbon
emissions.
The pain that is going to come, more pain and more suffering.
We can do that. So this is not, I never see the world in terms of those very concrete dualities, right? So this is not to say that, for instance, when I speak about identity politics, I say, yes, I need white allies. I need white friends. We need identity politics, but it's limiting to stick there alone. We need more than identity politics. We need something else. In the same way, this is not a dismissal of the hardworking, data-crunching, quantifying world that is creating a kind of world. You know, Frigga needs to have her due as well, is what I'm trying to say. But if that is where we stop, then we will be like those tractors in Denmark that are doing their hardest work to clear the beach shores and yet dump it back into the ocean. I'm trying to say that we're stuck here. Not that we dismiss anything here. There's no dismissal here. I'm trying to say we can do that. We can eat our cake. Is that the right expression? Eating our cake and having it.
With the rich.
That's too capitalist, and my brother might not squirm from that. He wants to eat the rich. So the point here is that we cannot do one thing alone. Data would take us so far. Data would take us as far as clearing the beach. But we still need to ask the question, why do we keep doing that? Why are we stuck here, right? Why are we, we've had, how many COPs do we have now, brother? COP 26? 27 is coming up. In COP26, do you know what they were saying? A diplomat told me, he said, the people in COP26 were like, yeah, there's COP27. That's where we are as a species, right? Yeah, there's COP28. Yeah, there's COP29. So we're stuck. We're repeating the same. That's not to say we shouldn't clear the beach. It's to say we need supplementary politics. We need a different kind of politics that meets this moment. And maybe it will be born, and it's already been born and nurtured from the conversations we're having, from the places where we review ancient, well, not quite ancient, but old archives, like a Frenchman following an autistic kid in the terrain, in the wild terrain. That's something ingenious and disturbing at the same time. But art is supposed to be disturbing. I think at the places of our discomfort lies new genealogies of power. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yes, we should eat the rich, brother. Yeah, if that's what you're trying to.
Actually, I was really moved by the comparison you made with slave ship and data. And I want to kind of, if you allow me to build on that.
Of course.
Where does the data come from? It comes from these sensors, right? It is precisely a worldview that is unable to feel the world aesthetically, that is building all these gadgets and puts this out there to try to feel it. So in a way, it feels like it is a desperate attempt to feel it, right? Because they are not using the tools we have at our disposal, not the aesthetics, not the arts, not the culture. And then where does the data go to? It goes to these supercomputers that crunch the numbers, that are black boxes, that even escape human understanding. And in that sense, I want to like really follow your metaphor. It does really evoke, you know, snatching bodies from a continent, throwing them into an eternal machine of the plantation. And the first reaction I was a bit like Teresa's, okay, how do we sink the ship? You know, as if like it is the absolute refusal of that. But then I was reminded, wait a minute, we can't sink it with the enslaved bodies in it. So how do we transform the ship? What do we do with that ship? And maybe this is a question for our 3 days as well to explore further. And actually, when you were presenting the talk, I thought you were going to talk about data instead of data. And that's where we are, right? How do we fight data with a bit of data? Data, like Duchamp and Dadaism, yeah. And also... Exactly. So, like, how do we conjure those practices to maybe transform the ship and the data? Because ultimately, what it is serving, it is trying to negotiate with this end of the world, right? It is trying to delay it. It is trying to survive what is unsustainable in the end. Whereas, if our attitude is a more evolutionist one, again, maybe it is more like sinking the ship. But yeah, how does those tools intervene, hack, or sink these mechanisms that are way beyond our control? And indeed, they are ambiguous because they are not purely evil. They also have their role. So I am struggling with these ambiguities, and I'm really welcoming the thoughts.
I love your articulation of it. I think you should have spoken this evening. I think I would encourage the struggle. I have a response to that, but I'm going to hold back from responding. And I invite the struggle. I think the art lies in the struggle, not in the answers, not in finality. So let's struggle with the question, how do we escape the slave ship? Maybe escape is an extension of the slave ship. I like to say that slave ships did not, and the reason why I speak about slave ships a lot is because they're active political constituents of our time, right? They haven't disappeared. They became the shore, right? They melted into the shore and they became our practices of work. They became our practices of space-time. They became our practices of meeting each other. They became identitarian policies. So we haven't escaped it. But how do we breach, how do we disturb the borders and the architecture of the slave ship? This is the subject of my next book. And I can tell you more about that, but I don't want to spoil it because I want you to read it. Where I trap a trickster in the slave ship, and I ask that same question. What does a trickster do to escape the slave ship? Struggle with it, brother.
I feel some murmurs from the back. I think we might have one more question from Yasmine.
Una noche me encontré volando por el universo. Las galaxias multicolores brillaban rodeadas por el negro más oscuro. Era un vuelo tranquilo, suave y lento que me reconfortaba. Este es el sueño de un volcán.
Cosa, un rêve un volcan.
Este
Cosa,
es el sueño de un
un
volcán.
rêve volcan.
Con esto sueñan los volcanes.
Cosa, il ressemble à un rêve volcan.
Con esto sueñan los volcanes.
Cosa, il ressemble à un rêve volcan.
Por esos días había leído que las rocas volcánicas y los meteoritos
Volcanique.
tienen una actividad magnética similar.
Magnétique, 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 magnétique.
¿Será por eso que los volcanes sueñan con el universo?
Volcan, il rêve l'univers.
¿Con qué sueñan los volcanes?
Cosa, il rêve un volcan.
Con el olor a hierro incandescente